Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of our Gallant podcast, co-hosted by myself, Baba Rahim, and Maulana Sajid. Maulana Saab is the Imam at Masjid al-Umar and head of the Paradise Academy, which is the Madrasa arm of the Gallant Muslim Welfare Association. He's also one of the avid volunteers at Gallant. Today we have a really special guest and a really special topic. Inshallah, you guys will enjoy it and be able to relate. Today we have our guest is the founder and CEO of an organization called Ilm to Amal, Brother Waqaus. Brother Waqaus, so I think we start with what is Ilm to Amal? What is the organization? What does it do? What's its essence?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, Babar. Assalamu alaikum, Maulana Sajid. Assalamu alaikum to all of our listeners and viewers, wherever you may be. Bismillah walhamdulillah. Ilm to Amal, as the name suggests, ilm is knowledge or learning or information, and amal is the action or the practice and the application of the information. So in its name, you can see it's about bringing learning, bridging learning and practice of that learning together, so it becomes meaningful and transformational for both the learner and the communities that they live in. So ilmchambel is actually the name of a project. That's what's in its name, but the name of the project, which is a character building program. So it's a character building program for Muslim children in the UK. It's actually the world's first dedicated structured syllabus on Islamic character education. I know that sounds crazy. When we started it 12 years ago, we had no idea, and we just carried on building, and before we knew it, we were onto something that was very unique and niche. So yeah, ilmchambel in short, it's a structured character development program made and designed by British Muslims for young children. In this context of ilmchambel, it's Muslim children, but the program could be applied to any child from any background, from the ages of 3 right through to 16.
So I think the natural question needs to be asked there is why did you feel there was a need to make this program for this character building program? What drove you? What was the flair that said actually we need to address this problem? What was the problem and what was the formation of it?
Alhamdulillah. Okay, so about 12 years ago, where were we? We were actually in another organization, another charitable organization, and there what happened was a group, some educators, Muslim leaders, scholars, ulama, and with them were some philanthropists, right? People who really they were genuinely concerned about this problem of Muslim identity, right? In young Muslims, also adults, but particularly the young people. So what they were really concerned with, and what they approached our organization with, was how do we address this identity crisis in Muslims, but in particular young people at the education level, right, grassroots. So how do we address this concern around identity crisis? And we need to unpack what identity crisis is in order to understand what the concern was. But the real driving factors for us was actually, hold on, we're not ulama, we're not even like your qualified primary school teachers or teachers per se. We're just a group of strategists, people who look at a problem, identify the problem or the understanding and the root causes of that problem, and then they look for the sort of resolutions for that problem. That's what strategy is, coming up with solutions to problems. So we were tasked with that by the Muslim community about 12 years ago. Alhamdulillah, it was a great privilege. And great ulama, mashallah, mashaykh, a number of educators got behind us and said, you guys are the right people to do this because you're strategists, professionals, you've got expertise in strategy, and you're not confined or from a particular background. So for example, Darul Uloom has its benefits, but from that environment, you're only going to see the world in the dimensions that you've been nurtured in. And the same goes for being a teacher. Whereas here you're out of the box basically, so it's easier for you to see the problems, from the outside as like a third eye, almost outside in opinion. And that we found that alhamdulillah as a great ni'mat and the privilege and the great amana that was put on our shoulders. It's not been easy, I must say. And that was our start. So we started actually sitting in the back of the classrooms, in madrasas, in schools, interviewing parents, and most importantly, having focus groups with young children as young as 7, right through to 16, so primary and secondary school years. And there we were asking them, sort of simple questions. Like, I think I remember 3 core questions that we asked them. I've got them here just to remind me what they were. 3 questions that we asked young people in around about 2008 and 9 after the credit crunch was, what does the best version of you look like? So that's in terms of mental, emotional health, academia, Islamically, what does the best version of you look like? And these are young Muslim children in Muslim faith schools and non-Muslim faith schools or mainstream schools. And, the answers were like eye-openers. Other questions were like, what do you want from your education system or your education that you're currently not receiving, be that in the school or in the madrasa or even at home? And the third question was like, if you were the head teacher of this particular school that you're in, what would you change or what would you do differently? It was this type of action-based research that actually made us realize, hold on, there's massive gaps in this education system, both Islamically and in mainstream. And unfortunately, these needs, i.e. the needs of learners, are not actually being met. They're being compromised for governance, or they've been compromised for national standards and whatever else. They're like, almost a byproduct, a side thing, and it's not at the front of tarbiyah. And that's a great shame, because the whole point of tarbiyah is to create confident, resilient, responsible children. So we just felt that we're onto something, and we need to do something with that research. And we looked for a lot of people to do it with, and eventually we ended up doing it ourselves. And yeah, that's where it was born out of, really, a concern for how do we create well-rounded, confident, active, ethical Muslims who are confident in their identity, they're well-rounded in the understanding of deen, they're active in their communities, and they're ethical in their character and dealings.
Brother, you mentioned there something which is really interesting, and you mentioned something around the identity crisis, and you kind of alluded to it when you said some of these questions answers were eye-opening. So what can you expand on what this identity crisis was and some of the findings in your research?
Well, this concept of identity crisis, it's actually one that's really, number one, misunderstood, vastly misunderstood amongst people from the same communities or the same professions, even at the grassroots level amongst our ulama, even amongst the teachers, even parents. Identity crisis is very, very complex, and it's very much misunderstood. But let me unpack the concept or the term identity crisis. It first came from a chap called a developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst, is well known by the name of Erik H. Erikson. He's German. So for many of you might not know who Erik H. Erikson is, but how many of you have suffered a midlife crisis? If you've suffered a midlife crisis like I have done, right? He was a guy who termed midlife crisis. So the term came from Erik H. Erikson. He looked at the analysis of what were the root causes of this crisis that people have in the middle ages of their life. He coined the term midlife crisis. He's a guy who also coined the term identity crisis. Identity crisis is basically, to keep it very simple and short and for our viewers, it's a state of confusion or a state of uncertainty about one's self or about their own purpose. It could be values, it could be basically physical, it could be mental, it could be spiritual, it could be psychological. So he was basically a guy who looked into personalities which develop around crises, which are plural of crisis in life. And so in other words, how do you know you're having an identity crisis? Well, if you're questioning who you are, maybe what's your purpose in life, what are your values in life? And I know as an employer and also as a life coach, these are fundamental questions that a lot of people are struggling to answer. Even the adults and even the young people. It's a bit unfair on the young people because they're still forming their worldview, right? They're still trying to work out this purpose in life, this big question. But the teachers and their parents and the adults that basically are responsible for them or responsible for facilitating their learning, even they are struggling to pinpoint the answer or find the answer to these big questions about who am I? What are my values? What's my purpose in life? Where do I belong? Where am I going next? What was I sent for? What do I have to achieve? What do I want to achieve? So if you're suffering, if you've got uncertainty around these, it's not necessary, but it could well be that you could be suffering from a identity crisis, which is a state of confusion and uncertainty. So you may be well questioning your sense or your self or your identity. Basically, that's what identity
So,
crisis is.
Waqaf, why as a Muslim, the youth, and why do they tend to have these identity crises? Like, alhamdulillah, we're always taught that we've got a purpose in life, and that's ultimately to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, live within our Islamic confinements, and inshallah we'll be successful. This life is only a journey to the akhirat. So why are we seeing an identity crisis within the Muslims, and why?
I think that's a really, Moulana, that's a really, really good question in terms of why, and really what we're looking at here is what are the root causes of an identity crisis. You put that in the context of Muslim children because that's the ones we obviously are Muslim, and we also know a great deal about what is required from us in terms of answering those questions from a faith perspective. But from your background, from my background, we're actually on the front line as educators, right? We're teachers, we're involved with young people, be it in our daytime jobs at schools or in the evening in the maktab or even at home with our children, right? So I think it's a really, really important question. Now, to begin answering that question is very, very complex, and we could talk about a number of factors affecting different types of youth. So there's a whole spectrum of Muslim youth, and I think that's before you even start answering the question, from my experience of research, which is both looking and reading of academia, but also action-based. And action-based means actually being in the room or in the ghettos or in the classrooms or in the real world with the people on the ground who are actually suffering from this, asking the questions, listening to the answers, and that's really what it's about, more about the questions than there is actually about finding the answers. All of that experience has led me to respond to your question with that it's really about three things that we need as humans, and this is just not just for Muslims, by the way. This is what Erik Erikson was alluding to. It's really about, it boils down to many factors, but it boils down to three. And I'm trying to simplify it because as educators, parents, or teachers, or youth workers who are listening to this podcast, really boils down to three things, in my opinion, based on everything I mentioned. It's about your sense of purpose, sense of belonging, and sense of responsibility. If we understand that, purpose is what's my objective of life, what's required from me, either by the world or by God or by what do I want. That's number one, which is your purpose in life. What at the end of it, what should I have done by my own standards or by my own wishes? Number two is about your sense of belonging. So when you have a purpose, you will find other people who share commonalities, common values, common purposes, and you call them either family, my ummah, my masjid, my community, my qawm. You'll find a belonging, my club, my society. That's what we call sense of belonging. And then everybody has a sense of responsibility or sense of ownership for the first two things. So we got purpose, belonging, and then we have ownership, which is, sense of responsibility, which is, I now know what my purpose is, I now belong, but I now need to go out and achieve it. So these three things are at the helm, if you want, at the center or at the root of a positive identity, but also the lack of these three things, a distorted purpose, a lack of sense of belonging or a disconnect from people around you, and apathy, which is the opposite of responsibility, not being bothered, laissez-faire, somebody else will come and do it, sort of a negative attitude to doing things. These combinations at the root, the common factors, are what lead to an identity crisis, starting with the purpose, not knowing who you are, not knowing what your purpose is, not what your direction is or your values. If you don't have that, you're not going to have a sense of belonging with people. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be responsible for yourself or the wider community. So I think generally speaking, it's really around these three things. But you asked the question, that's why it's an interesting question, because the answer to all three of these questions, it's, when you read the Quran and when you read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the inspirational stories of the Sahaba Ajma'een, right? You just cannot miss the the answers or the solutions to these questions, or the responses to these questions, which are laid out for you, not only in theory but also in legacies, in practice. You see how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the Anbiya alayhi salam, or even the Sahaba, the people around, the men, women, and children around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how they found their purpose, how they fulfilled their purpose, how they had a sense of belonging as an ummah. Ask that to the question of the Sahaba in Badr. There were only 313, outnumbered by 1100, right? Ask that to the people in the bazaars of Medina, or you ask that to the people in the cave, right? They had these values, and because they had these fundamental things at the root of their identity, they were very strong individuals. When we have strong individuals, that's when we have strong communities. So it is bizarre that you pose a very good question. That is bizarre that if we've got all of this in theory, then what's the missing gap with our youth who suffer an identity crisis? They don't believe in it, or they're completely oblivious. They're either ignorant or they're just disconnected. And let's not forget, part of identity crisis is also your mental, emotional health. So you might know your purpose, you might have a sense of belonging, you might even want the responsibility, but you might not be able to do it. And this is what we understand as tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of us are tested.
So, Brother Waqaus, the Ilm to Amal initiative, Ilm obviously knowledge to Amal, practical. I think people, they gain the Ilm, whether it be from the schools or mosques or the madrasas, or whether it be their parents teaching them at home, but so then applying that Ilm in their life and how to apply it. And I think that's where people get stuck, because they don't know where to apply it or how to apply it. So it's the amal. So you might have it all stored here, but it's how to bring it into your life. And I think that's the initiative that you guys are talking about. And that's the identity crisis. When people are a bit lost, even when as Muslims we lose our way, is because we're stuck. We don't know where to go, where to head towards, which road to take. So I think so this Into Amal initiative, I think it's very good, because the thing is, I remember studying myself. Not everybody is clever or the top numbers. So what would happen was, myself, to understand something, I had to see it. For example, going Hajj, you can learn the fiqh of going for Hajj, but until you don't practically do it, you won't understand the masail. Or you would always learn about the masail of the hoof, the wearing of the leather socks, and masal al khufain. And again, you would do as much reading of it in the fiqh kitabs. Until you don't wear them, you won't know the practical reality of them until you wear them. So I think it's always applying those. I think a lot of people and a lot of children are those people that need to see to believe.
Absolutely.
Or they need to do it to think, yes, I've got the confidence, or somebody showed me the way, and now I can hopefully do. So even if he does trip up, he'll have the confidence that he made the right step. So I think, and even in our madrasa, I think, and Masha, I've been working with yourself for quite a while, and I've seen the work that you're doing. And something like this on a simpler form we've introduced into our madrasa is just values that sometimes can't be explained through textbooks, but they were in the Sahabas, they were in the Prophet. The Prophet was the one that gave tarbiyah to the Sahabas, and they are Islamic values that, like, of honor. How do you explain honor in a textbook? Do you understand? How do you explain Sharm Haya in a textbooks? Yeah, alhamdulillah, we've got great examples, in the Quran and the Sunnah, but it's about applying them qualities into your life. And these are values that we need to bring out. And this is what made Muslims, these values and these qualities that they had. But it's about getting them into our life, because whenever then we are stuck, we'll remember that, look, alhamdulillah, we are from an honorable people. We have our izzat. And why do we keep our izzat? Because this is from Allah and His Rasul, and that will stop you from a sin, that will stop you from going the wrong way. So there's
Absolutely.
Amal is everything, isn't it? Like they say, you can have all the knowledge, but without amal,
Absolutely.
it's nothing. So it's about another question that I
practice,
have.
yeah.
Another
Yeah.
the title that we've chosen for this podcast was transforming victims into change makers.
Changemakers.
So
Mhm.
what do you mean by victims, and can you elaborate on that point?
Just before, that's a very good point you made about the application point, and we'll come on. I think we'll come on into some of the other questions. It's a very important point about the application. Also, the biggest point I want to lock in, which is the why. If people do not understand why they need to do something, or why should I get out of bed to do X, Y, Z, it's not going to move them. It's not going to intrinsically shift them to do something. So I think you made a really good point in your own personal experience as a Maulana and as an Alim student that went to Darul Uloom, and how you were learning and connecting the cognitive development, which is human development, brain development, with your real day life. And that's exactly what ilmchambel is doing, is that it's building people in the real world that they live in. So they're not just learning in an environment and takes them out and keeps them out there for a long time, and then eventually after 6 years or 7 years of practice, it's learning through the practice itself. So the learning itself is actually practical, and that's the maqsad. The question you ask about the title about the victims and what we understand by victims, or what we understand by change makers, is a very good question again. Now, the victims point is, if you look at statistically, this is not to accuse that all Muslims are basically victims of some sort of crisis. But when we look at the statistics and when we do the focus groups and the research, right, what we tend to find is that as a minority living in the present climate, and by minority, we're looking at 3 million Muslims that make up British Muslims in this country, right, out of a population of 68 million. Okay, that's barely 5%. So that's the first thing, is that you see yourself as a minority. Secondly, if you look at the constant bombardment that Muslims will get in the media, in the infrastructure, in other words, the institutional racism and the discrimination, Islamophobia, hate crimes, and I don't want to fuel that mentality by addressing this point. I'm just addressing what we understand by being a victim. Then it's no surprise, it should come no surprise to us that, hold on, there's not actually a level playing field that we have for people of, number one, color. Generally speaking, if you look at the whole Black Lives Matter situation in the last sort of 6 months in particular, we see now that, hold on, there is definitely big racial inequities that we have between people of color and people of not color, so whites. And Muslims in there, they're not the most rock bottom because the blacks are, but above the blacks, in other words, after the blacks, it's basically going to have the Muslims. Now, if you are a black Muslimah wearing a hijab, right, there's very few people that can actually beat you in terms of being a victim of discrimination, a victim of inequities, inequalities in the society. So that's what we understand by being a victim, is that actually many young people, the polls have been done, research polls have been conducted by various different organizations across the country, particularly at Muslims, who have interviewed them, and the percentages that they find of young Muslims expressing their views of unfairness, injustices, racial inequities. Why that racial inequities? That just because they're Muslim, because they got a name Muhammad, they wear a beard, mashallah, as beautiful as yours, Maulana Sajid, and as cool as Babar's, right? Mine's a bit frizzled at the moment, but just because they wear a hijab or they overtly look Muslim, they are discriminated, whether it's in employment, whether it's in basically education or on the buses, they are abused. They're seen as the fifth column, or they're seen as a third society, or someone who's a threat to society. This is what we understand by victims, that it's become so rife and common. We must be very careful in not assuming that all of us are victims, but it's so popular and so common that the average young Muslim is going to suffer an identity crisis, and that pressure is going to come, largely speaking, either within insecurities, and that's going to be impacted by the bubbles that we live in, the media reports that we see, the news, in the movies that we're watching, even the video games that are being played today now, products that are being produced with Allah's name on the soul. There's so much that's being targeted at young person that the chances of them being a change maker is minimal, and the chances of them, turning out a victim is strikingly high. So unless
do do we not? Should we not like accept that as Muslims we will be victims? Why? Because throughout the Quran, the history,
Yes.
whoever's
Yes.
on the truth were always identified being on the false or wrongly accused, for many wrong things. And throughout the Prophet, the challenges that they faced, they were victims from their own communities, and people would make up lies against them just to knock them down, just to put them down and their believers down, and the followers down. But the thing was, obviously, they were on the truth, they were on the right, and they was always successful in dunya and akhirat. But obviously, batil and the people on the opposite side will always
Yeah.
try to put you down. And we see when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, after prophethood and
So,
Nabuwwat, the challenges that he faced from his own community, forget others. Do you understand? And
absolutely.
facing that from your own community, and they were ready to bribe Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Look, do you want money? We'll
Absolutely.
give you wealth. Do
Yeah.
you want to get married? We'll give you a wife. Do you want,
Yeah.
the kingdom? We'll give you kingdom. But Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't want that for them. He wanted success for them of dunya and akhirat, and he said, "No, say la ilaha illallah. That's all I want from you." But the thing
Mm.
was, those same people, they labeled Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as a poet, as a magician, as a madman, everything that they could think of. And this was a history that whenever any prophet went to the people, unfortunately, they got labeled. And this is happening with those. It happened in the past, and it'll happen in the future. Why? Because Alhamdulillah, we are a major force, uh, and the thing is, Batil will always try to eradicate, but we know Allah Ta'ala will never let this happen. Well, these are the things that I think, isn't it part of our tarbiyah that we should say to our children, that obviously be ready for these challenges that you're going to face. And these
Absolutely.
challenges
Yeah.
are mentioned in the Quran, they mentioned in the Hadith. And
Yes.
but the thing was, they overcame these challenges. And you can't stop on anything. You got to carry on pushing yourself.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. Your
because if you
question, you,
don't, if we don't make that mindset, I think then you can get
you will
bogged
become
down,
weak.
and then you can,
Yeah.
you think,
Yeah.
oh no, everything's lost, and then we see people going to a mental depression
Yes.
state,
Yeah.
and that can be bad for the person.
Yeah. Your question was that should we not accept that we, because by holding the truth, by being the people of the Kitab, and sort of having the responsibilities of the final messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that we will be victims. And I think you've covered the answer quite well enough. And the only thing I would add to that is that the answer to that question is, if you look at the people that you've cited, the Sahaba Ajma'een, the Anbiya alayhi salam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the community around him, 1442 years ago, they didn't accept. They accepted that it's going to be challenging. They accepted that to be on the haqq is not going to be an easy ride. It's going to be a prison, almost like a prison for us. We're going to have lots of challenges, but they also accepted that we can't live as victims. What we have to do is we have to live as change makers. So we have to basically move to this concept of not feeling sorry for ourselves and, burying our heads in the sand. We need to change and rise up and change this society. As the Quran says that, the change starts within ourselves. So the world around us, Surah Ra'ad, the society around us will not change until we change that is within us. They understood this ayat really well, wore it on the sleeve, lived it day by day, breathed the teachings of this. This is a very ayat that is inspiration to this title, which is that, look, we can either choose to, that whatever happens outside of our influence, our control, right, is going to happen anyway. That's going to be sent as a test. That's going to happen around us. For whatever reason, we can debate all day long till blue in the face, why us? But it's happening. The point is what you said there very nicely, which is by shaping this mindset. There's certain things that are outside of our control in our circle of concern, and there's certain things which are inside of our circle, which are the circle of influence. In other words, we are able to do things with our tongues, our hands, our hearts, our minds. Those things are which we will be accountable for. And it's in those things that we have to, especially as educators, especially as parents in the 21st century, especially as ulama, madaris, maktab, mudaris teachers, we have the ability and the opportunity to shape a mindset in our young people, inside the home, inside the madrasa, inside the schools, to become confident in themselves, to be able to overcome the victimhood, right? Stop feeling sorry for ourselves, but to be able to know how to navigate ourselves in the real world, not as victims, but as the change makers like the previous predecessors. So yes, that's what this is about. And I know there's going to be some parents listening out there. I know there will be some teachers listening out there, and they'll be thinking, well, how do you do this? You know, it's all well and good with that spiel and motivational talk. How do you do this? And this is where my experience, especially in the last 15 years, not just with ilmchambel, has honestly been profound in the sense of giving the children the sense of purpose. And this is my short answer to that. You know, how do we do it? We start with those three things. If we go back to forming a very strong identity based on a clear sense of purpose, right, which people understand. So not just that we as adults talk and dictate, but children find that for themselves. And we have to give them opportunities, like you said, through practice, through experience, opening them up to the world, not being afraid of that, and let them live in the real world to find a belonging. And above all, we should be giving them responsibilities to take responsibility for their own future. These three things are, if you ask me in this podcast, if I'm to leave anything behind, based on the last 15 years of action-based research, in our Islamic education, in our tarbiyah in the homes, in our maktab syllabus or school syllabus or curriculum, if we are not giving them these three things in every lesson, then we are not fit for purpose. That's the upshot of my experience in doing that. And it doesn't just stop there. That's just what we should be giving them. How we do that, that's another question in itself.
And there's always been people that were doing tarbiyah, obvious processes, who did the tarbiyah of Sahabas and like that throughout history. We had people, whether they be alims or whether they be the peers, the sheikhs, whatever, throughout history. We saw Hazrat Mullah Yusuf Mutala Sahib, he made men that would go out, and I think what you're mentioning is making people that can go out and they don't break, but they carry on with their identity. You know, the fitnas are always going to be there around. But I remember when Hazrat House was the first Jamaat that went to university, and our Sheikh Mullah Yusuf Mutasa got criticized for it. But and one of the things was saying that how can you send ulama to university? But Hazrat said, look, fitna is everywhere, but your job is to, you know, you're made now, you know, and you go out and you're there for your own purpose, and you go out, educate yourself, and you know, help the people outside. And that's what it is, making those people, and it's giving tarbiyah to the people. And I think that's where today what you're trying to basically say is making these men that are ready for men and women and children for tomorrow's, you know, challenges that they face. So
I'd just like to mention, I'm so glad you mentioned, if I may just add to that, you mentioned something really important, which has tracked a memory back to me. I was in Bradford. Bradford was my stomping ground at university. Mashallah, I had 3 great years there and 1 in Leeds. I remember vividly now, you just touched upon something and a memory came back, if I may quickly add this anecdote, because it's relevant to the point you're making about confidence in yourself, but also the point I'm making, which is, have we got the confidence to engage with the wider society, stick our head above the parapet and, you know, take the hits? Are we sheltering our children far too much? I understand the need for protection, but are we doing it so much that's actually inhibiting them, limiting them, you know, sort of cocooning them to their detriment? And when I was at university one day, I remember, this is so interesting and it's really bizarre. I remember one of your local masjids around campus, I think it was Howard Street. I was sitting there on a Wednesday afternoon, and I get a knock on the door, and there were 12 brothers stood by the wall who come to meet me that I've never met them in my life. I don't know who they are. You know, they just turned up, and they started with the 2 old guys with big white beards and went down to the youngest person who barely had a beard on his chin, hair on his chin. And I was like absolutely flabbergasted, like, who are these people that I've come to, you know, how do they find me? How do they come to see me? Why have they come to see me? And then they started talking to me. And I was so nervous and intimidated that I actually, you know, closed the door. I said, no, thanks, I'm all right. I'm going to go back upstairs because, I don't know, maybe as a student, I had a guilty feeling. So I closed the door on these brothers from a local masjid. A couple of hours later, there was another knock on the door on the same day. And I went down again, opened the door, and this is the halls of residence. And it were 2 missionaries from America who were Christians. And their approach was a lot softer and a bit more sort of, because only 2 of them compared to 12. For these guys, I ended up opening the door and said, come in. Come in. We'll have a cup of tea. We'll sit down. And I sat them down in the kitchen and we had a conversation and they pulled out the Bible and they wanted to invite me to their way. It was basically not Jehovah's Witnesses, but it was to a denomination within Mormons. That's it. Sorry, it was Mormons. Actually, is in Preston. The world first ever church. The guy who found Mormons is actually from just on the outskirts of Preston, near where I live in Lancashire. What I'm saying is that experience of engaging with Christian missionaries, that I actually had no ideas to answer the questions about Prophet Isa alayhi salam and Jesus and the Trinity. I remember being very baffled and very confused. Later, when I engaged more with the Jamaats and sat and learned what their purpose and their message was, I realized that what I had done that day, here you had a group of people who came to give you the ABC, and here you had a group of people in the afternoon who basically wanted to give you XYZ. And if you can't understand ABC, you're not going to be able to question or challenge XYZ. And it was a very frightening experience because I could have left. I could have, in other words, I could have really crashed. And it did actually put a lot of questions in my head. The reason why I'm sharing this with you is because, on one hand, I find that we don't give enough opportunities for our children in the education system, be that in the maktab or in the schools, to go out and experience the world and meet people from all backgrounds and all diverse, sort of all walks of life, and engage in conversations, no matter how difficult they may be. On one hand, we don't do enough of that. But on the other hand, we don't prepare the mindset of our children and our youth to be able to have those opportunities, right? Or to be able to do those opportunities in a way that they feel secure, in a way they feel confident. And this is, when you mentioned that about Jamaats going on campus, that's what stuck out to me, that I can't find a better example in my own personal life where I've had a crisis. And I'm going to make an admission, so you know, when I'm talking about this concept of identity crisis with passion, I'm doing it because I myself have suffered so many crises, plural of a crisis, in my life. And if you ask Babar, yourself, coming out of Darul, you ask anybody in the streets now, have you ever stopped and questioned your purpose in life? Do you still know who you are? Do you know what values define you? And I'm telling you, this stropa, which I'm about to do soon, inshallah, after COVID is lifted, on the street with 100 or 1,000 people, you will see statistically that actually, by definition, quite a lot of us actually don't know who we are, don't know what our purpose is, don't know what we're going to do or how we're going to do it. So I think this is a really big issue. Now, how we tackle that, how we deal with that, this is really what we need to get into, in terms of talking about it, understanding in one thing, that's in itself, what is a crisis, what leads to a crisis. But as educators now, and as parents, can we help build that mindset? That's what we need to get on to. Can we do our best, what's in our control, to shape a mind? And at the end, we can't, indoctrinate our children. What we can do is give them the tarbiyah and give them the tools, give them the haqq, give them this access to the sources. And then I think one of the best things we can do, and it's scary, is to stand back and let them find their purpose on their own feet. As scary as it sounds, I think honestly that's the way forward.
Brother, I have a
Sure.
question. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about building confidence and building character. And we're talking about an age group, which is when you talk about the 7-year-olds up to the 15, 16-year-old. When we talk about the academics and building the people, we generally think about the traditional math, science, English, and that's what gets tested, right? So in a world where we are today, success is getting an A in your maths or level 9 or whatever, getting a good mark in your science, getting a good mark in your maths, right? And that what gets you your good GCSEs, which is going to get you your good A level, which is going to get you your good university, which is then going to get you a good job. And that's that we're then going to make you successful. You're going to have lots of money, have an easy life, and that's kind of the story that's passed to us. So how is this? What the concepts we're talking about here about confidence, independence, we're talking about morals, we're talking about strong people and identity and focus around knowing mentally what's good. How is this relating? How does this in parallel work with this this narrative that we live in our current society, where we talk about this stream that we have to go through. It's all about academia. It's all about getting to this utopia life where everything's good. You have money, you have a good life, good car, good house, good. So what's the parallel that we can draw here?
It's a very good question, Babar. There's a psychologist, it slipped my mind the name of the psychologist, but his statement's a very profound response to this question. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when we were growing up, the IQ was the most important thing, people's intelligence and cognitive development. Cognitive development is this thing here. We're developing the brain. You look at our education system all the last 30, 40 years, everything is on intellectual development. True, right? It's built on intellectual development. In other words, we get tested. Look at the way our tests are all on memorization. Can you learn information, absorb, memorize, recollect, and represent? It's all on memory, nothing on skill. That's what we've been grown up on through the system. Okay. The psychologist, again, I forget his name, made a very good point, which said, actually, today, EQ, in other words, emotional quotient, right? Everything to do with soft skills, everything to do with someone's feelings, the state of mental health, all of these things around the emotional quotient that are connected to the heart, which I'll come on to in a minute, right? These are twice, if not thrice, as important as IQ now. So it's not about the intellectual development anymore. Now, what he's saying, or what's being said here, is actually nothing new to us as Muslims, right? Why? Maulana's on the screen, he can tell you the hadith in Arabic, but I will allude to it, right? Firstly, let's start with the Prophet ﷺ. Prophet ﷺ said, there is a flesh, meat in your bosom, right? In your body. If that is correct, then everything else connected to that will be correct, okay? Will be developed. If that's strong, everything else will be strong. If that is corrupt, everything else will be corrupt or weak, right? And that is the heart, the qalb, and that is the heart. So he's telling us, the Prophet ﷺ, from just that particular hadith, he's telling us, but if you look at the way he dealt with his Sahaba, both men and women and even children, right? Even friends and enemies, his own employer, which was Khadija radiallahu anha, even his employees, the people he might have employed, okay? The people that were around the Prophet ﷺ in different professions, in different capacities, his emotional skills and his emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence and EQ was the best amongst all of leaders of time. The way he dealt with people that were intellectuals but also non-intellectuals. The way he dealt with people who were so sophisticated and less sophisticated in one bit. That's amazing. If you fast forward and you learn about this. Before the Prophet ﷺ, we had the Greek philosophers. They also spent a lot of time on developing the whole human being, not just the intellectual development. They talked a lot about temperance. They talked a lot about the justice, wisdom. They talked about a lot of sort of qualities in developing people. For us, in our tradition, we are so grateful to a figure called Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, right, who's very well known amongst top 5 thinkers of the world of all time. What Imam Ghazali rahmatullah did was he took from his teachers the teachings of the Greek philosophers and Islamified them with Islamic sciences to give us the beautiful book called Ihya Ulumuddin. Now, if you study the book of Ihya Ulumuddin, which Maulana Noda has done and many other scholars and educators have done or are doing, it is an absolute masterpiece in trying to understand the human psyche and understanding how humans, what makes them tick and what makes them work. So what Imam Ghazali rahmatullah was saying, in line with the Prophet ﷺ, in line with the Greek philosophers, was actually for character development, to develop a human being, the most important aspect development is actually the emotional well-being, the emotional development, which is all connected with the heart, as the Prophet ﷺ said. If I answer your question in a modern day context, right, that we have academia, we have tests, we have all of these things. This is the way that the education system in this world, in particular this country and many, many other countries, is skewed, and it's the way it's been designed. To understand why there is so much stress on academia, you have to go back to the root of understanding why schools or the concept of schools was set up in the first place. Did we have a school or a madrasa the way we have in Girlington today? at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. I listened to Mullah Fazl last week, mashallah. He was making the connection with, the masjid and the madrasa being intertwined, and the sufa, which was the madrasa. Now, if I'm not wrong from my understanding, yes, it was a madrasa type that was of the masjid, but that was for adults. You don't see children in the hundreds of the Sahaba Jama'een and the children being dropped off at 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock like we do today. It wasn't the madrasa that we understand as, the after school thing today. Because why? Because the parents at that time, they took the responsibility for the tarbiyah of their own children. They didn't need to outsource it to others unless they have to send them to the mountains like the Prophet ﷺ, Safiya radiallahu anha, Hamza radiallahu anhuma. These guys were sent, children of the Arabs were sent to the deserts to learn self-sufficiency. So what I'm saying is, if you look at the systems of the past and you look at our system of the education system, the whole purpose of schools set up was so that the children can go there and learn enough to become the next labor force of this country, of the government, serve the needs of the state, whilst the parents who drop them off at the schools can go and work for the state. You have to understand, it was never done to create the great philosophers. It was never set up to create the thinkers or the change makers. There's a deep-rooted problem with the education system that we are in. And I know you're going to say, well, hold on, we went through the system and we turned out all right. This is, if you knew what you could have got in terms of real tarbiyah compared to what we're having at the moment, then we would have a great understanding. But all I would like to say to that question is the connection between character and academia is profound. How can you train someone's brain if they're not willing to sit and listen with adab, with etiquettes, with manners, with respect? So I think this is a really important way to look at it, is that the character is fundamental to unlocking academic achievement. Academic achievement alone is not enough.
Well, like you said, Waqaus, sometimes adab and akhlaq and character, you can only understand sometimes, like you said, if your ustad has got it, or if your parents have got it, and then it's built into you. Like today, we see sometimes in a society where people from different regions have moved in, and then you think, Alhamdulillah, I'm Muslim. A good thing that these things have been passed down. We've got some kind of sharam, parda, haya, some kind of values inside us, of etiquette, of adab, of respect for elders. But when we see around and we see in other societies, they don't have that respect for elders. So they probably once in a year they might see their parents or whatever, and then you think, Alhamdulillah, Muslim. And so that's why sometimes, even when you have a conversation with a non-Muslim, sometimes he don't understand that aspect of that respect or etiquette for parents, or sharam, or haya, or why? Because it's not in his life. And I think what we need to do is, like you said, we've got to, first of all, okay, within the education system, whatever, but within our children, we've got to smash that achievement is only that GCSE or A levels or the degree or whatever it may be. Achievement can be, like we were saying, that you mentioned the hadith, that Allah Ta'ala, He doesn't look at your appearance or your wealth. He looks at your heart and your actions. And a person might have an issue of anger management.
Yes.
And the Prophet mentioned to us that the best person is the one who can control his anger.
Yes.
Right, but the thing is somebody can control his anger, and you should champion that much. And look, brother, you're doing the right thing. Do you understand?
Absolutely.
Or somebody, sometimes you see, like, we deal with youngsters, and mashallah, they might not be the brightest, but they've got themselves a job, and they've saved themselves from haram, and they said, oh Sadi, should we go, I'm looking for a potential marriage, go, some rishta out there, and they've got themselves married, they've had children, and they're working and giving them the ta'lim and tarbiyat. And then I say to Mashi, what you've done is a remarkable thing. You saved yourself from the zina and all the filth that's out there. Because majority of people, whether we Muslim or non-Muslim, they're going towards that. That shaitan leads people towards that. But to protect your izzat at your age, we should champion these things.
Absolutely.
And that's what achievement is. Sometimes we don't, sometimes there'll be, people come up to you and say, Sayyid, Alhamdulillah, I've never missed a namaz in my life. And he's been matured for about 3-4 years. And it might not be the brightest kid, whatever, but you say,
Mm.
subhanallah, that's amazing, and that's an achievement. Do you understand? So the thing is, we've got to, achievement is not just, we've seen
It's
Sahabas
it's not just academic. What you're saying is achievement is not just academic. But if you look at on that point of achievement, right? Take two types of people. Take two categories. I give you two examples. Take the high accomplished people, the people accomplish something in their life, and take the ones that have become the statistics. Okay, they've called. I don't want to label them, but you'll always find a group of people who feel that they left school. 100 kids left school in 2000, and in 2020, 10 of them achieved amazing things, and the other 90 were basically struggling in different places of the world and one. I'm just giving an example, made up example, right? What was the difference between the 90 and the 10? You'll find when you do the analysis on anything like this, and a fair analysis, the difference would be, and don't be surprised if it's character and not academic achievement. Because there will be people in that 90 bracket that would have had better grades than those in the 10 bracket. But the character of the 10 people in the 10 to not give up and keep persevering and be determined and have resilience. And like you said, the ethics and the honor and the self-belief, self-esteem, there's hundreds of characteristics, what we call virtues, right? In this field of character development is called virtues. They have so many strong virtues in them through tarbiyah that have been developed, that when their back is up against the ropes, when life is down in the gutter, right, they pick themselves up and they keep trying. I mean, just take a look at how many of you got light bulb. I've got light bulb on behind here, right? You know the story about Thomas Edison. We've all heard where the light bulb came from, right? How many times did he go through in terms of failing to get to finding the light bulb and how it works? Over 1,000 experiments he had to do to get to the light bulb, right? If we have the mindset of people who have weak character and all the brains, we'll give up after 3, 4, 5 attempts because your theory is not working. But someone's character who's strong will either know when to give up and when not to give up. So that's one group of people. There's another group of people, which is we all follow, mashallah, celebrities and professionals. What's the difference between a professional and amateur? Right? Mashallah, you have professional in your area. In Girlington, you've got, mashallah, yeah. Sorry, what was the name?
Adil Rashid.
Adil Rashid, of course, Adil Rashid, the spinner, right? I played cricket with his brother Harun. What I'm saying is that basically you've got professionals.
So you were the amateur and you were the professional.
Yeah, there you go. What's the difference between me and him? The difference is, right, practice makes perfect. The amateur will have a natural, no doubt people will have natural gifts. You see professional cricketers, you see professionals, it might be actors, it might be comedians, they have a natural gift, okay? But even with that natural gift, it's not good enough without practice. And practice makes perfect. It's a universal phenomenon that we've always grown up with. And that's the difference between practice makes perfect, right? Between a professional and an amateur. Is someone who continuously practices and believes in himself or herself to become and do it like second nature. And an amateur you can spend so much time and they will not be able to get it right. And my point is, the difference between the two is going to come down to character. By character here, we should not make the mistake that character is just, in other words, akhlaq, as we call it in our tradition. Character or akhlaq is just being a nice, come by our Muslim, okay? Someone slaps you on the right cheek and you say, mashallah, brother, slap me on the left if you want, right? That's one part of akhlaq, right? There are many aspects of akhlaq that are to do with personal development, like Barbara was saying in terms of achievement, right? That we overlook. This is all connected to akhlaq. My question to all the maktab teachers out there who are doing an amazing job, and I'm 100% from the same boat and the same camp as you, and I support all the makatib and all of our institutes where our grandparents have given blood, sweat and tears for over the years. Our mashaykh, you mentioned Sheikh Hazrat Maulana Yusuf Mat'ala and Hafiz Patel and many, many others in this country have given their blood, sweat and tears and their life for setting these institutes up for the hifazat and the preservation of iman of children. My question is on a critical level, which is, to what extent are we giving practice, right, number one, in our tarbiyah? making that practice? And number two, to what extent are we broadly looking at character education? Not just in terms of being nice and combine. Muslims naturally, mashallah, are very, very nice and very accommodating and very hospitable and warm. I'm talking about the other characteristics, the other virtues of character, resilience, and all these other wisdom, courage, emotional intelligence, compassion, not just compassion, but other things, right? Productivity. These are all things in character. How much of this is being covered in our curriculum and in our syllabus from the age of 5 right through to 16 when we have those children in our institutes? That's the question. What drove ilmchambel to go and do what it did with the programs that we are developing now? Because we saw a gap.
MashaAllah. So I have another question which is almost like a follow on from some of the things you said here. So you mentioned in an answer a couple of questions ago around like giving responsibility to the children and kind of stepping back and watching them grow into this. As a parent myself, I look at my children and the difference between how they grow up today and how we grew up, right? So when we grew up and it was after school and you finished masjid, and as long as it was before Maghrib time, it was like we were out, right? We were out, and then Maghrib time we knew we had to be home, right? Even though the times were different. We knew it's getting dark. I gotta go home. Dad's gonna be waiting for me. Mom's gonna be waiting for me. But it was a different time. Like I remember some of the places we used to go around. They weren't necessarily close to home. But now, if I heard my kid going up to wherever Childeen or up on his own today, it's a different thing today, right? They just don't venture that far.
Absolutely.
To get them out and cross the street is a big thing. Let alone like into the next Manningham or getting them to go up to Heaton and Taunton. Getting them to go that far is a different thing. So my question is this: how do we get our children as parents to instill some of these values we've been talking about today about, okay, respect is different. So obviously respect is how we can instill that in the home. Getting them to get these life experiences safely, about going out and get the interaction with the other communities.
It's a very good question. I think Maulana hit the nail on the head earlier about mentioning modeling. He didn't use the word modeling, but what he was talking about, alluding to, was modeling, that the tarbiyah has to come from, you've got to see the tarbiyah in the people that you're receiving it from. So namely parents at home, teachers in the classroom. That's even the science of character development globally has come to look at effective ways of how do you do tarbiyah. Your question is more about experience of the world and practical learning, right? That's what I understood your question as. But connected to that, it's going to be down to this point about, well, one is we got to go out and find the opportunities, but you might not be old enough. I'm talking about the younger. So in other words, what I'm saying here is, if I reapproach the question again, for the younger children who don't have the autonomy or sort of the maturity to go out and push the boundaries and find the opportunities, right? Which is bizarre, because children normally, you think they love play, they love nature, they love outdoor play, they want to meet people, they want to go and push the boundaries. Well, not all children. You got some introverts, you got some people who want to play on their own, people who just want to sit, lots of different kettles of fish, right? What I'm saying, naturally, that's what it was when we were growing up, that we wanted to go out and experience the whole world. And if we'd gone past half a mile, we thought we were in America, or we were in a different part of the world that we've gone away from the town that we grew up in. We can't see our school anymore. We can't see our streets that we grew up anymore. We must be in a different country. That time has completely changed. So if you've got children who are so young and don't have the autonomy or the maturity to do that, it has to come from what Maulana mentioned, which is modeling. And my children are actually in the younger brackets of 5, 8, and 10. For the last, as long as I can remember from the moment the first one was born, we've been venturing together as mum and dad with the children to demonstrate to them that, look, life experiences of visiting places, going in nature, going exploring, going shopping together, or going on holidays together, even if it's going for fitness walks together, we try to involve our children in that. When you involve them, eventually they will say that this is life. This is how you live. This is how my dad became my dad. This is how my mum became a teacher, is that she went out and pushed the boundaries to do that. They eventually automatically will start absorbing that from a young age. That's for children who are young. Now, when you get to the older children, how can you basically move a child, say a 14-year-old? And I know lots of 14-year-olds who do not want to go out and do what we want. You could push them, bribe them, they will not go, right? You just would not move. How do you do that? And this goes back to the initial question that Maulana raised earlier, which is why I when he asked me another question, I said, let me just lock this point in because it's going to be a running theme further down into the next question. And this is a good place to revisit that. That why question, right? Why should I go is so important for the human psyche, or is so important to move or transform the human. You have to answer that question, why. It's stronger, this question of why, in children than it is actually in adults, but nonetheless, it's really important in all of us. So if you're asking the question of, look, we've got to get these guys out to do more, one, we have to be involved as educators and leaders and parents. We have to be involved in that. We have to demonstrate that, hold on, look, I'm going and I'm benefiting and you need to come with me. Secondly, this is something that I've started doing with my eldest. She's entering her teens now. And she's asking that question is like, we've just been on a walk 2 hours before I come on live on air. And two of my children wanted to go and explore another park after exploring the one park that we covered back and front about 10 times, right? Two of them wanted to go and do that. My middle one wanted to come straight home. Now, my little one asked him, why do you want to go home, Musa? In the car. They're having this conversation on the way back for this podcast. And he didn't answer. And she said, I know why you want to go back. She's 5. I said, you want to go back because you love the gadgets and you want gadget time. You're missing, you're craving your addiction for gadgets. They're having this conversation. And I thought that's so important. She's asked a really important question, why? And she's also basically, demonstrated what the issue is right now with lots of people not doing that in this generation. So I want to say that, look, for the younger kids, it is about demonstrating, it's about being involved, it's about modeling the change that you want to see in them and the opportunities you want them to take. You have to model that, you have to show them that. For example, if you want your children to eat properly, the psychologists say that for 21 days, right? I'm not this numbers guy, right? But 21 days, it's when a certain period of transformation takes place, right? Psychologists say this, that 21 days, 3 meals a day, you need to sit with them and eat the food that you want them to eat in the portion size that you want them to eat, at the time that you want them to eat, at the speed that you want them to eat. So in other words, you need to demonstrate 3 times a day for 21 days, like clockwork, the change that you want them to be, the change that you want them to have. And over time, watch 21 days, the tawfiq of Allah, they will change. And it's proven to be a very effective method. Now, what I want to say is that what I've done with my eldest one, the teenagers, the issue doesn't lie so much with the primary school ones, the younger ones, because you can, one way or the other, you can motivate them through hook and crook. You can dangle a carrot, or you can swing a baseball bat, and I don't mean that in a cruel way, but you know what I mean, that you can, it's basically dangling a carrot, motivating them, or threatening them that if they don't do this, they'll have this removed. You can move them easily. The difficulty lies in the teenagers. Now, what I've started doing with my eldest is having conversations with her about this thing about highly effective people that I know, my personal anecdotes, so not made up ones, personal anecdotes in my life, the ones who left school or the ones I saw and looked up to. What was the difference between them, and what's the difference between those who have, become they're struggling, or even worse, they've gone to prison, or even worse, they've basically become victims, right? And they've fallen by the wayside of society. I'm talking to her about them, and I'm genuinely, because remember, whatever tarbiyah that we gave, whatever advice that we gave, if it's with ikhlas and it's haqq, in other words, it's truth, that is what will shape and move the person, right? Not the brilliance of my eloquent speech, or the brilliance of what I'm trying to say just for the sake of saying it. It's got to be in the science of what you're saying. That's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts transformation in an individual, if it's the truth. So speaking with truth, I tell her that X, Y, Z did A, B, C. In other words, A person, B person, C person, I really look up to them. And even better is if you can take your children to meet A, B, and C, and sit with them and have a coffee, or go out and play with them, and say to your children, interview Uncle A, interview Auntie B, interview Cousin C, and ask them why he became a scientist, why he became a lawyer, why did he become a imam, why did he become a maulana, why did she just want to be a housewife? So you're not telling them that labels have to be so glamorous. You're telling them that all these people, for them, this is the muazzin. Why is a person a muazzin? He's the most successful person that we will know on the day of Qiyamah. He's been raised with honor and dignity. Why? Ask him why he's given up his job to become a muazzin. So my children, I've started doing this with them, especially the elders, because them guys, you're not going to be able to motivate, you're not going to be able to force them or push them, encourage them for long. So they have to discover their why. The answer to why do I need to go out and explore? Why do I need to go out and move, the boundaries?
But Waqas, in this, mashallah, all the points you're mentioning, sometimes what happens is, like you said, especially at that age, it's an age of exploring and people are intrigued. And the why will only get answered sometimes, unfortunately, by them exploring. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
I met a person, quite much a very religious background, family as well. Both husband and wife do a lot of effort of deen, and they've done the ta'aleem, tarbiyat, everything. And they said, Maulana, what can I do? And this, that. I said, look, don't get yourself down. Your job is to give the ta'aleem and tarbiyat. You've done the best you can. Sometimes people, and because obvious parents are listening here, obviously no parent wants their child to go down a slippery slope or down the wrong way. But what happens is, like we've seen, and again, so many people that have reformed, like Junaid Jamshed, or many great people that even the past, the scholars, Malik ibn Dinar, Rahmatullah alayhi story is one of the famous one. So the thing is, people went down the slippery slope and they had to experience that for them to come back. So we've got to let parents know as well that you can only do your ta'aleem, your bit. And once you've done your bit, like you said, you leave it to Allah, and hidayat and guidance is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But some person, and that's what sometimes what happens is, and when I deal with people or my 3 sons are good, but this one's really bad. I said, no. It shouldn't be like that. Okay, you got what you wanted to see from the 3, and probably one didn't go down and hasn't become that person that you wanted. You might not have got his degree, you might not become a hafiz and whatever, but that doesn't mean he's a failure. Do you understand?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think these are things that we've got, because what happens is, unfortunately, people that when you talk about the stress and the mental, families get bogged down. Oh, this one's a failure, this one's like this, and this guy, he's useless, and the other 3 are brilliant, and do you understand? And no, that's totally the wrong. If it's not in his tawfiq, he's not to be. And sometimes it's good that he doesn't become a hafiz, and then unfortunately he forgets it and goes down a worse path. Then so at least him not becoming hafiz, Allah Ta'ala probably wanted that better for him. Do you understand? And so the thing is, ta'aleem and tarbiyat is always been a big thing, a big part of every madrasa, every maktab. And I think you mentioned this point before, the last week when we talked about the masjid madrasa. What used to happen was, in the madrasa system, you give the ta'aleem and everything. Then you think, okay, when this child got to 13, 14, what we'll do is we'll take one Jamaat with us. And then Jamaat, the practical aspects will come in. He'll learn to cook. He'll go out. He'll converse with people. And, that's where so that's how the masjid then plays a big role, where the ta'aleem is going on, the tarbiyat is going on in a different shape. You might give somebody a ta'aleem. Okay, brother, you do the ta'aleem today in front of 50 people. Do you understand? And that, I remember when I did my first ta'aleem, they used to call me 7-Up because I was sweating so much and I was pouring with sweat. And the Jamaat guys after that called me 7-Up. Yeah, I don't know why. So the thing was,
baptisms. They call it the baptism of fire. Throw people into the fire and let them, basically sink or swim, basically.
And sometimes that's what makes you, and that's what helps you, and gets you onto that track. Otherwise, you won't have done it until sometimes we do it with our own children. You realize that, wait a minute, if you're not going to throw him in the deep end, you're not going to swim. And so.
Well, have you got? You all have children, mashallah. If you ever accompany them to the swimming pool, which I do, religiously every week, it's like after Jummah we've got swimming on Saturday, right? And we don't miss that. Now, basically, that's basically it. If you see swimming, you'll see, subhanallah, that you throw children in. Parents are not in the swimming pool, right? When they're having the lessons and they're swimming away, You move back, your children, that's the point I'm trying to make, that if we support them, I'm not saying put them in danger, of course I'm not saying that, but if you support them to the point where some risk, this is a problem that we have with our system, that it doesn't like risk. If we have some risk, subhanAllah, watch, they need that risk to learn. And the tripping and the falling and the threat of drowning, it's good for them to realize, hold on, actually, this is real, and this is how I navigate. I know we need to wrap up. There's 2 quotes very quickly that I wanted to mention with you, which I've always found very, very inspirational. Outside of the Sahaba Ajmain and the Prophet ﷺ, there's 2 quotes by psychologists or educationalists, right? Number 1 was by a chap called John W. Gardner. And he said that education is monumentally ineffective today. Why? Because far too often, we, the educators, the murabbi, the maulanas, the ulama, the makatib, mudaris, all of us are in this, myself included. We far too often, what we, the educators, are doing is giving children cut flowers. We cut the flower, we give it to them. What we should be really doing is teaching them to sow their own seeds and grow their own plants. That's always been something that's transformed me. When I've learned after the seerah, looking at how the Prophet ﷺ's tarbiyah was done and the Sahaba Ajmain did their things, this has been one very profound thing that really has inspired Amal to do what it does today. Number 2 is another quote by Andre Gide. And Andre Gide, what he said was, connected to what we were talking about, Babar, about kicking your kids out, and now we have to force them out. Back in the day, we were forced to come in. Yeah, people were pulling us in. Now we're pulling them out. Andre Gide's quote, which is basically, he said, "You will not discover new oceans until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore." And this is the conversation I'm talking about. This type of conversation that you need to have with children, especially from 9, 10, depending on the literacy levels and understanding and maturity. But certainly in teenagers, we need them to understand that out there in travel, like Ibn Battuta, rahimullah, out there, Imam Ghazali, they discovered new oceans because they had the courage to lose sight of the shore. If you choose to stay at home now, there's only one loser. There's only one person who's not seeing the world. This is the type of conversation I'm talking about, answering that. Why do I need to do X, Y, Z?
MashaAllah. So often you get people on and they're talking about, you could go on forever. Brother, you're one of them people that you can feel the passion in what you're doing, and it's inspirational. It really is. And we could go on for hours, but we have a time allocation of an hour, and alhamdulillah, we're there. So we don't want to take up too much of your time as well. So in closing up, if you had one message to the people listening to this, the parents, some of the children, some of the educators, what would your message be, brother, to them people to take away from this podcast?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah. I think the main message, which has constantly been resonating throughout the questions and answers that we've had, is around this question, why? And I think the biggest thing I could say to the parents is that there's no such thing as bad children. There's no such thing as bad kids. Kids are innocent. They're masoom, right? They're God's gift to us, right? They're flowers, the seeds basically that we sow into the ground and we cultivate. That's what tarbiyah is. Tarbiyah is connected to the word rububiyyah, which is to do with cultivation and upbringing and raising out, just like the farmer does. So as farmers, we need to look at ourselves do we understand our purpose in life? Do we have a sense of belonging in ourselves? Do we have a responsibility that our children who don't listen from the ears, but they listen through the eyes, are we demonstrating the change to them that we want to see in them? That's the first message. Connected to that question is, what's your why? Have you answered your why yourself as the adult before you go to the child and ask, what is your why? So you can't ask the child, what's your why, if you don't even know what your own why is. And that's what goes back to the message about what Maulana was saying, was, it's all about at the heart of it, it's about why. So my main thing to the parents, to the educators, is seek to understand yourself before you seek to be understood by others. Seek to understand others and their needs before you seek to be understood by them. And I think if we can start with this, Why? Sense of purpose, sense of belonging, sense of responsibility in ourselves, in our children, also in our institutes. If you're a maktab teacher or a school teacher, in the curriculum, that for me is going to the roots and then not hacking at the branches. Like Maulana Rumi Rahimullah said, that what you're searching for in the branches actually lies in the roots. So for me, the roots are these things about answering your why, finding your sense of purpose, finding your sense of belonging, fostering your sense of belonging, and exercising your sense of responsibility to be the change that you want to see. If we did this as adults and parents, inshallah, watch the children around us transform.
MashaAllah.
Bismillah.
Maulana Saab, any closing comments from yourself?
Yeah, mashallah, just like Brother Waqas mentioned, I think it's all about grassroots works, and I'm a great believer of grassroots works. Sometimes we worry and people come crying afterwards, oh, my son, he's 20 years old and not listening to me, not obeying me, and but then you ask the question, well, what did, like you said, what did you sow the seed? What did you do? What talim, what tarbiyah did you give him? What instruction did you give him in life? Do you understand? And a lot of the times, whatever, if you want the perfect role model for them, if their environment in the house wasn't there for them, obviously, then don't cry afterwards, whatever's going to happen. So it's very important, first of all, as parents, we're more than the ustads, more than the teachers in school, is parents are the ideal role model for the children. And the parents, they've got to base their role model being from the Sahabas, from the Prophet ﷺ, from the Deen of Islam, because the qualities that you get from there, you won't get from the education system. You can't explain, like we talked about, akhlaq, adab, sharam, parda, haya, ghairat, all these things that our elders had. They never had much knowledge, but they had these qualities which made them strong people, and we still talk about them today. So if we want to build our youth to be strong people of tomorrow, we need to inculcate all these qualities, values inside them. But first of all, we need to be that role model ourselves. May Allah Ta'ala give me the tawfiq first and foremost, and gives all that tawfiq. And Jazakallah for Brother Waqas for attending today, and enlightening us as well.
Great, brothers. MashaAllah. Well, give us tawfiq. Ameen.
MashaAllah, it's been awesome. So last couple of little agenda items just to get done. So if you want to donate, Masjid Umar is obviously building a new masjid. We talk about it every week, and we're making progress. We want to get the level 1 and level 2 done, so we can get the education for the girls out of the cabins, which are really in a state. We want to get them into the new masjid and start using that new masjid. So donations are open. If you look along the bottom of the screen, there's the donation for the bank account, there's a GoFundMe page, or if you want to do cash, Brother Zulfikar will arrange a safe way to get cash to him. Any of them ways would be really appreciated. If you like what we're doing here, think about liking and subscribing to the channel. Next week's podcast is on a really special topic. It's on RSE. So if you feel like you want to know more about
what
that topic,
is RSE, Baba? RSE,
relationship and sex education, which is being taught, is becoming mandatory to be taught in our schools. So if that's a topic which you're interested in, you've got children in the age range that are going to be taught this. We have a special guest on, Brother Yusuf Patel, who knows a lot about this topic. If you jump on, he will be able to educate us about this. So inshallah, next week at 6 o'clock. Jazakallah for tuning in, and inshallah we'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum.